What's that? Take cover. It's another heretic!
Hello, everyone. This is another heretic or Brother Nathan, whichever you prefer. I've been very busy as of late. Again, just with more projects. Um, Exciting update. I have found someone to work with and produce another podcast with. This particular podcast, which we are currently working on getting together, is going to be less spiritually focused and more focused on current events and uh so-called conspiracy theories. Will we deal with scripture and things of spirituality? Yes, but this is not the focus. So when I have more information on that, I will send that information your way. Here at Another Heretic, what we do is we focus a little more on the spiritual aspect of things. Um, and take a little less of a broad approach, even though we do talk about um, many other subjects. We always try to focus on the spiritual aspect of it. So my schedule is filling up. The works that I'm being called to do are ever increasing, and there's a lot of exciting things on the horizon, I think. Um, that being said, what I'm going to do today for you is read chapter 13 of Rulers of Evil, which is again found at my website, anabaptistapologist.com. Real quick here before I forget, Another Heretic and Anabaptist Apologist are almost one and the same. You might say that Anabaptist Apologist is the literary apologetics aspect of the ministry. This is where I post all of my blogs. This is where I post recommended reading and host PDFs in my library. Another Heretic really is the audio visual part of the ministry, which replaced my Anabaptist Apologist YouTube channel because that one got taken down for whatever reason. And so I've been starting from scratch. Um, so that being said, if you look here on my website, my most recent post is Public Schools, Freemasonic Farms. And um, in this article, in this essay, I go through and I talk about the history, the dangers of public schooling, the history of um, the Pledge of Allegiance, and that sort of thing. I expose it as the idolatry that it is. I explain the Freemasonic hand behind the creation of all of these things and encourage people to leave the cult of the state. So that is the most recent article up on the website. But for today, if you go to the library, you scroll down, click Rulers of Evil, we will be in chapter 13. You can type in down here page 140, and that is where we will begin. So, chapter 13 by Tupper Saussy, Rulers of Evil, titled The Secret Bridge. The New Catholic Encyclopedia identifies the men who attacked the Society of Jesus as, quote, the radical devotees of the rationalistic Enlightenment, richly talented and influential writers such as Voltaire, Rousseau, and other philosophies among the encyclopedists, the followers of Freemasonry and high-placed government officials, end quote. Attacking the Jesuits was for them a, quote, step toward their ultimate objective of abolishing all religions, of all religious orders, the papacy, and finally the church itself. The masterpiece of the encyclopedists, most of whom happened to be philosophies, was the monumental Encyclopedia of Sciences, Arts, and Trades, 1743 to 1751. The encyclopedia was the flame of the Enlightenment, the fulfillment of Cardinal Wolsey's dream of flooding the world with print containing learning against learning. It brought so much learning, secular learning as against scriptural learning, and it became its own paradigm, demanding radical change in existing norms. The Enlightenment called for a new age that placed reason above any church, above even the Bible. The new age issued in the elegant neo-Gnostic religion of deism, the thinking man's alternative to Roman Catholicism and its imperious hold on the human conscience. Nowhere was deism more methodically practiced than around the altars of Freemasonry. As the great Masonic scholar Albert Pike put it, here, wrote Pike in his influential Morals and Dogma, 1871, quote, the Christian, the Hebrew, the Muslim, the Brahmin, the followers of Confucius and Zoroaster can assemble as brethren and unite in prayer to the one God who is above all gods. The end quote. The brethren prayerfully climb the Gnostic pyramid of successive illumination until, hopefully, a oneness with the supreme God is attained. As Pike explained, the deists, like the papacy, looked upon the Bible as something of a stumbling block. Quote, the Freemason does not pretend to dogmatic certainty, nor vainly imagine such certainty attainable. He considers that if there were no written revelation, he could safely rest the hopes that animate him and the principles that guide him on the deductions of reason and the convictions of instinct and consciousness. He studies the wonders of the heavens, the framework and revolutions of the earth, the mysterious beauties and adaptations of animal existence, the moral and material constitution of the human creature, so fearfully and wonderfully made, and is satisfied that God is. End quote. Most of the philosophies, including Frederick the Great, the Protestant king of Prussia, who subsidized the entire encyclopedia project, were deistic brethren, as were the high-placed government officials who pushed for the disestablishment of the Jesuits. All the Bourbon monarchs employed as their official advisors ardent members of the Lodge, to use Professor Martin's phrase. The Marquis de Pombal of Portugal was a Mason. Charles III's advisor, the Count de Aranda, Louis XV Minister de Tilot, and the Duke de Choiseul, as well as Maria Theresa's Prince von Kaunitz and Gerard von Swieten, all belonged to the secret brotherhood. Since it was no secret that the Enlightenment aimed to make Roman Catholicism passé, Pope Clement XII promulgated in 1728 the Constitution in Eminenti, which appeared to condemn Freemasonry thusly: Condemnatio Societatis de Conventiculorum de Freemasons, under the penalty ipso facto incurred, or excommunication, absolution from it being reserved to Pontifex Maximus. Freemasons of whatever sect or religion, confederate together in a close and inscrutable bond according to secret laws and orders agreed upon between them, and bind themselves as well by a strict oath taken on the Bible as the imprecations of heavy punishments preserve their mysteries with inviolable secrecy. The great mischiefs which generally accrue from secret bodies are antagonistic to civil and canonical laws. Wherefore, by the advice of the cardinals and of our mere motion, and from the plenitude of the apostolic power, we do condemn and prohibit the meetings of the above-named Society of Freemasons. We strictly command that no one, under any pretext or color, dare to presume to promote, favor, admit, or conceal in their houses members of assemblies of this abominable order, nor in any way aid or assist in their meeting in any place, or to administer medicine to them in their sickness, or in any manner, directly or indirectly, by themselves or others, afford them counsel or help in their hour of trial and affliction, or persuade others to join said order. While Eminente's stern rhetoric, which was renewed by Benedict XIV in 1751, seems to dig a wide ocean between Catholicism and Freemasonry, its fruits tell another story. Why, for example, were the Bourbon monarchs, all of them Roman Catholic, never penalized or excommunicated for admitting, promoting, and favoring Masonic advisors? And why, a decade after the Marquis de Pombal had shipped the Jesuits out of Portugal, did Clement XIV send an appeasing nuncio to the Portuguese court, elevate Pombal's brother to bishop, and confirm all Pombal's nominees in bishoprics? The answer, of course, is contained in the bull's title, which provides that absolution from penalties or excommunication is, quote, reserved to Pontifex Maximus. That is to say, associating with the abomination of Freemasonry, if done for a cause valuable to the papacy, such as weakening the Jesuits to the point everybody assumes they're no longer a threat to Protestantism, will be absolved by the papacy. Given the historical context, does any other answer make sense? So, in other words, if you remember, I know it's been a while, but if you recall from the last chapter, Ritchie had ordered that all of the Jesuits essentially be banished and outlawed and criminalized. But this was in order to drive the society of so-called Jesus further underground. It was basically to create plausible deniability. It was a psyop. It was feigned fervor against them. And so it is with the Freemasons, because if you know, Freemasons and Jesuits are essentially one and the same. We continue reading then. The leading Jesuit bashers were not only Freemasons, they were also the product of Jesuit learning against learning. It was the ratio studiorum, the Medici Library's Gnostic wisdom absorbed in an ambience of casuistry, equivocation, mental reservation, and obedience of the understanding, combined with smatterings of Holy Scripture, usually filtered through the commentaries of church doctors, that had turned 2 centuries of Jesuited students into secular philosophies. The ratio studiorum dictated the form and scope of the encyclopedia, which in turn codified the Enlightenment paradigm, whose deistic litany was preached, quote, around the altars of Freemasonry. In other words, this is all controlled op for the purpose of creating layers of plausible deniability so that you can never exactly pinpoint who is who and who's doing what. Continue reading. Hold Freemasonry up to the light and you cannot help but see the black papacy's watermark. Isn't it reasonable, given the circumstances, that the G in the center of the familiar Masonic emblem represents the initial of Gesu, the residence of the Black Popes at the Jesuits' world headquarters at number 5, Borgo Sancto Spiritu in Rome? Freemasons wouldn't suspect this, nor would Jesuits. It would be information reserved uniquely to the unknown superior, who shares what he knows with no one. Your enemies will serve you without their wishes, said Sun-tzu, or even their knowledge. Freemasonry was the natural, the reasonable, the only intelligent way for the Roman Catholic Church to control A, the ongoing affront of Protestantism, B, the increase in divine right kings heading their own national churches independent of Vatican control, and C, the incredible explosion of international mercantilism. Like the aquatic creature whose mouth resembles a comfortable resting place to its prey, the lodges were a sagacious recycling of the old Templar infrastructure into a dynamic spiritual and economic brotherhood that gave Protestants, Jews, Buddhists, Muslims, agnostics, and anyone else an opportunity to build a better life outside Roman Catholicism, yet still under the church's superintending eye. For Sun Tzu said, the general sees all, hears all, does all, and in appearance is not involved with anything. End quote. The Jesuit general is the disembodied I, substituting for the pyramid's missing capstone, the stone the builders rejected. The lodge's secrecy and its condemnation by the church were essential to sustaining the integrity of both institutions. And so the deepest Masonic secret, the secret that not even their grandest masters could penetrate, was that all their secrets were known to one man alone, the superior general of the Society of Jesus. This should not surprise anyone aware of how thoroughly Freemasonry is suffused with Jesuitic technique. Both Freemasonry and the Society of Jesus are A, humanist religious orders, B, secretive, C, fraternal, D, socially conscientious and politically active, questing like Aeneas, the prototypical Roman, for the greatest good, for the greatest number. Both orders, E, hold tradition, reason, and experience in equal, if not greater esteem than the Bible. F, employ carefully structured programs of Gnostic visualization to achieve an ever-increasing knowledge of the divine. G, condone the end justifies the means, and H, require absolute obedience, secured by a blood oath, to a hierarchy of superiors, culminating in the Jesuit general, whose orders are so wisely suited to the recipient that they are obeyed as though willed by the recipient himself. The first recorded member of American Freemasonry was Daniel Coxey, who was constituted provincial Grand Master of the provinces of New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania on June 5th, 1730, on a deputation granted by the Duke of Norfolk, Grand Master of Masons in England. Evidently, Coxey was an industrious recruiter. Minutes of a meeting of the Grand Lodge of London on January 29, 1731, reflect that Coxey's health was proposed and drank as Provincial Grand Master of North America. End quote. Daniel Coxey was actually a junior, according to Sidney Hayden's Washington and His Compeers, 1868. He was, quote, the son of Dr. Daniel Coxey of England, who was physician to the Queen of Charles II. End quote. Dr. Coxey must be presumed a Roman Catholic sympathizer, as both Charles and his queen were Catholics. The queen, Catherine of Braganza or Portugal, flaunted a huge Vatican entourage, for which she was continually harassed by death plots. Charles converted to Catholicism in exchange for money from Louis XIV of France under the terms of the Treaty of Dover. The junior Daniel Coxey deserves wider recognition as an American visionary, or at least the sole apologist of some undisclosed visionary. 13 years before Benjamin Franklin's proposal of a colonial union to the Albany Congress in 1754, for which Franklin is credited with being the first to suggest a United States, Coxey published in England a dissertation promoting a scheme to settle, quote, an extensive tract of country lying on the Gulf of Mexico, end quote, owned by his father, the Queen's physician. The dissertation, entitled A Description of the English Province of Carolina, by the Spaniards called Florida, and by the French La Louisiane, promoted the elder Coxey's tract as an English province allied with New England against the Spanish, French, and Indians. It called for, quote, all the colonies appertaining to the Crown of Great Britain on the northern continent of America to be united under a legal, regular, and firm establishment, over which a lieutenant or supreme governor may be constituted and appointed to preside on the spot, to whom the governors of each colony shall be subordinate, end quote. With this union of governments under one president, Coxey foresaw, quote, a great council or general convention of the estates of the colonies to, quote, meet together, consult, and advise for the good of the whole. These United States would provide for the mutual defense and safety, as well as, if necessary, for offense and invasion of their enemies, independently of the protections of the British Crown. Of course, these imaginings became reality 40 years later with the fulfillment of Lorenzo Ricci's strategy for dividing the British Empire. Considering the elements involved, lands owned by the Catholic Queen's physician, lands managed and promoted by the physician's son, who is a Freemason deputed to generate an American brotherhood by the 8th Duke of Norfolk, who himself was a member of England's premier Roman Catholic family. Coxey's dissertation appears to be the earliest formatting of the colonial conscience to devise thinking by agents of the Black Papacy. In other words, before Ben Franklin said anything about a United States with these colonies over here, this man, who is the first American Freemason, Daniel Coxey, was in England writing plans, dissertations, calling for a United States in this new world, which means the United States of America is the land of the Freemason. So real quick here, again, if you go back to my website, you can look at the symbols and the pledges related to this Freemasonic cult of America. It's really quite astounding, but it's rather simple once you connect the dots. Continuing reading here then in chapter 13, the Duke of Norfolk, Grand Master of Masons in England, was also known as Thomas Howard, Earl of Arundel. His nephew Henry, Lord Arundel, occupied Wardour Castle near Tisbury in Wiltshire. At the time Clement XIV disestablished the Jesuits. We shall see how, in the autumn of 1773, it was to Lord Arundel's castle that John Carroll repaired when civil authorities closed down the Jesuit school in Liege, Belgium, where Carroll had been teaching. For a year, Carroll stayed at Wardour, serving as the Arundel family's tutor and chaplain before sailing for America to participate in the Revolution. 33rd degree Masonic scholar Manly P. Hall, in his Gnostic extravaganza, Secret Teachings of All Ages, an encyclopedic outline of Masonic, Hermetic, Kabbalistic, and Rosicrucian symbolic philosophy, 1988, remarked that, quote, not only were many founders of the United States government Masons, but they received aid from a secret and august body existing in Europe, which helped them to establish this country from a peculiar and particular purpose known only to the initiated few. Most histories of the American government skim over the Masonic presence. Americans like their history told in high-definition icons of good and evil, liberty and tyranny, heroism and treason, might and right. They won't buy a heritage polluted by dark spots of mystery. Yet the greater part of American governmental heritage is almost wholly mysterious. The man best qualified to become our country's greatest historian, certainly the man with the most complete access to primary sources in the revolutionary cause, was Charles Thomson, an authentic classical scholar, a discreet Protestant, steeped in Medici learning. Thomson was known as perpetual secretary of the Continental Congress. He inscribed minutes of every congressional session from 1774 until ratification of the Constitution in 1789. With William Barton, a Freemason, he designed the Great Seal of the United States of America. The choice of its Virgilian mottos is credited exclusively to Thomson. Among his contemporaries, Charles Thompson's name was synonymous with truth. So accurate were his minutes of Pennsylvania's negotiations with the Delaware Indians that the Delawares called him Wegulaw Moend, the man who talks the truth. When he would take his daily reports of congressional proceedings to the streets, eager moms would cry, "Here comes Charles Thompson. Here comes the truth." Wow. Um, this is, I think, very fascinating. Um, I don't know about you, but not only is it fascinating, but it's also quite damning. Um, yeah. Moving on, I suppose. Sorry, I'm trying to pull out quotes and stuff for some essays I'm working on. So continuing here, once the Constitution was ratified, Charles Thompson retired to Harriton, his country home in Bryn Mawr. He destroyed his personal papers relative to the creation of the new republic. An article by Kenneth Bowling of the Pennsylvania Magazine of History and Biography, 1976, says that Thompson actually wrote a lengthy history of the Revolution, which he also destroyed. Thompson biographer J. Edwin Hendricks of Wake Forest suggests a fate other than destruction, alluding to persistent rumors that the Thompson papers are in the Pennsylvania Masonic records. Professor Hendricks assured me personally that numerous inquiries have failed to reflect Thompson's membership in Pennsylvania Masonry. Whether Thompson destroyed his history or surrendered it to the crypt of secrecy, it is clear that he knew there were certain elements in the formation of American government that must be ignored. If the truth were known, he told friends darkly, many careers would be tarnished and the leadership of the nation would be weakened. End quote. Real quick here, just another comment. This reminds me of what people are saying about the Epstein stuff, that if the government were to release everything unredacted, if the truth were known, then many careers would be destroyed. That it would certainly wreak havoc all around the world and cause many governments to reel and buckle under the weight of social outcry. Me personally, I say let it happen. Let the tree fall. Let the trees fall. Lay the axe to the root. But of course, they never will because our Freemasonic, satanic, selected officials love power, profit, and control more than they love the truth. So don't hold your breath. It will never happen. Not until kingdom come. Not until Yeshua returns. So, continuing on, we read, and so Charles Thompson occupied the remaining 40 years of his life translating the Septuagint, the Greek language Bible, into English. Still, he was frequently requested to write the definitive insider's history of the Revolution. Dr. Benjamin Rush overheard Thompson's reply to one such request and recorded it in his diary. "No," said he, "I ought not, for I should contradict all the histories of the great events of the Revolution, and show by my account of men, motives, and measures that we are wholly indebted to the agency of Providence for its successful issue. Let the world admire the supposed wisdom and valor of our great men. Perhaps they may adopt the qualities that have been ascribed to them, and thus good may be done. I shall not undeceive future generations." End quote. What I believe Thompson was meaning to say is simply that no historical account of the American Revolution can be truthful unless it discloses the role played by the agency of Providence. Notice that Thompson does not use the word providence alone, which was understood in his day to mean God or Christ. He does not say we are wholly indebted to God or we are wholly indebted to Christ, but rather to the agency thereof. If Thompson knew the word agency was a synonym for vicar, I can't imagine that a professional linguist wouldn't. And if he knew that the popes had been called vicars of Christ since the 5th century, I can't imagine what a biblical scholar of his quality wouldn't. Then Thompson was most likely saying, "We are wholly indebted to the vicar of Christ, that is, the Roman papacy." But what a ridiculous statement to the post-revolutionary American mindset. Who would have believed such an outrageous notion coming from even the man who talks the truth? The embattled, degenerate, dying papacy could not possibly have affected the revolution. Anyone foolish enough to run with this idea would have crashed headlong into a wall of ridicule. For Thompson, there was no future in telling what he knew. Since he chose not to undeceive future generations, the American people have lived according to histories that can be contradicted by truth. They have been served by careers and leaders that truth could tarnish and weaken. They seem comfortable in their deception, which is generally the case among consenting subjects to Roman rule. Let's now move to the next chapter, wherein we shall see how the Jesuits, which we now recognize as the unsung architects of the Enlightenment, supplied the American colonists a philosophical basis for rebelling against Great Britain. Wow. What another amazing, fascinating chapter. This is powerful, mind-freeing information, wouldn't you say? If you like more of this kind of content, stay tuned because this is the sort of thing that my friend and I will be going over in our new podcast. But you'll also get my solo commentary and solo projects here at Another Heretic as well. Thank you to all of you who are patient with my uploading. I don't have a regular schedule. Life is just a little too busy for this humble painter and drywaller, but I do try. So thank you very much for all of you who subscribe. Please share the content. And until next time, have a good day.
Thank you for watching. What Jesus says to one, he says to all. Repent and believe the gospel, for the kingdom of God and of heaven is at hand.